The moment you step into the shadowed halls of Topkapi Palace, even centuries later, you can almost feel the echoes of whispers, moans, and footsteps that belonged to those whose lives were bought and sold in silence. They were the invisible men of the Ottoman Empire, the concubines who existed in a world where beauty and obedience were currency, where freedom was a legend, and where cruelty was the quiet air they breathed. Picture it, a young boy ripped from a village he will never see again, thrust into a world of opulent terror, with walls adorned in gold and floors that gleam under chandeliers. But every shine conceals chains, every marble hides scars, and every smile is a mask hiding suffering. This is the story of what life truly meant for Ottoman male concubines, a tale that has been deliberately brushed into the shadows of history. Before we descend further into this haunting world, take a moment, subscribe to the channel to ensure you don't miss the depth of this story as it unfolds. And while you're here, I want to know, what time is it for you right now, and where are you watching from? Comment below. Let this be a conversation, because what you're about to witness is not just history, it is an experience, a window into the lives that were denied even the dignity of anonymity. Our tale begins not in the grand courts, but in the faintest, most inconspicuous corners of the empire. Children were taken from the Balkans, from Anatolia, and occasionally even from the distant Caucasus. Families would awaken one morning to find their sons gone, vanished like smoke into the imperial edifice. It was not theft, it was law, sanctioned and celebrated by a state whose obsession with hierarchy and control knew no human limit. The boys were then transported, chained or watched with fierce eyes to the palace's inner sanctum, harem, though the term itself is a misnomer to the casual observer. Here the air was thick with incense, but it could not mask the coppery tang of blood and the sweat of fear. The young male concubines were trained meticulously, their minds reshaped to serve, their bodies molded to please. There was a system, precise and merciless, where failure was not an option, and defiance was met with consequences the imagination struggles to contain. The first hours in the palace were the most dangerous. The guards, men whose own hearts had long since learned cruelty as a necessity, watched with predatory patience. Initiation was not gentle, it was deliberate. A boy who cried was broken. One who resisted was erased from records entirely. The empire had no need for heroes among the concubines. It required perfection, and perfection demanded suffering. Imagine standing in a room where every wall is adorned with exquisite tapestries, every window draped in silks, yet the beauty is a trap, a cage designed to mesmerize the eyes while suffocating the spirit. They would wear garments that felt alien against their skin, collars that reminded them of their servitude. Every movement was monitored, every glance was recorded, and the whispers could drive a mind to edges it had never known. Other boys, some older, some younger, became mirrors of fear, cautionary tales, and competitors in a world where survival was a performance as precise as it was terrifying. But here lies the cruel twist, the psychological knife that cut deeper than any lash. Within these walls, some boys were elevated above others, praised for their compliance, their beauty, their intelligence. This small light, a flicker of recognition, was a lure, an intoxicant designed to bind them ever tighter. They were told they could achieve privilege, perhaps even safety, if they pleased their masters completely. Yet the same hands that lifted them could crush them wit. How to second thought? The palace offered hope as a weapon, teaching that the line between favor and annihilation was a single misstep. A smile too wide, a glance too bold, a hesitation too long. It is difficult to convey the atmosphere in words alone. You must imagine the textures, the fine silk robes that chafed, the cold stone floors that burned the soles of bare feet, the echoing halls where laughter and screams intertwined into a single haunting melody. Every day was a lesson, every night a trial. The concubines were educated, yes, but in arts that pleased the court, in languages that allowed them to speak in gilded deception, and in manners that made cruelty invisible, polite, even desirable. The empire did not want monsters outside, it bred them inside. And yet, even in this merciless structure, there was an undercurrent of human longing, a desperate attempt to retain identity. Boys whispered names from their villages, pressed hands against walls they could not cross, prayed to gods they barely remembered. Some plotted escape, some succumbed to despair, some learned to mask terror with a mask of serenity. But survival, above all, was a performance that left scars deeper than any blade. By the end of this journey, you will know what happened behind the silken doors, how boys became instruments of political power, toys of obsession, and victims of psychological warfare. The horrors were as elaborate as the architecture, as systematic as the empire itself. And there is one revelation, a truth so shocking that it will challenge everything you thought you knew about the Ottoman court, about power, and about the human cost of beauty. It waits for you in the final section. Hold that thought. Prepare yourself. Because as we step through the gates of this story, you are not merely a witness. You are a traveler in a world that was at once magnificent, monstrous, and unbearably intimate. The Ottoman Empire was a realm of paradoxes. Wonder and terror lived side by side, separated only by the thin thread of silk that draped its palaces. To the outside world, the Sultan were patrons of art, architects of civilization, rulers of lands stretching across 3 continents. Inside, however, the same power could erase a human life in a heartbeat. In the hidden heart of the empire, male concubines existed, not as men, not as boys, but as vessels for control, entertainment, and politics. From the moment they were taken, every rhythm of their lives was stripped away, their pasts dismissed, their voices ignored, their bodies transformed into symbols of obedience. This was not mere servitude, it was psychological engineering, perfected over centuries. Boys were selected with precision, strong, beautiful, malleable. Agents of the empire plucked them from villages, leaving behind only silence and grief. The journey to the palace was brutal, days chained, exposed to hunger and exhaustion. By arrival, they were already broken. The first sight of the palace was disorienting. Gold-laden halls, fountains singing with water, tapestries shimmering with every step. Beauty was a weapon, designed to confuse and seduce. Inside, the concubines faced a cruel education, languages to manipulate, music and poetry to enchant, manners to obey. Failure had severe consequences, often invisible to the outside world. A boy could vanish overnight, rumored exiled or worse. Only silence remained where he had been. Cruelty was both punishment and tool. The Sultan's inner circle relied on concubines to convey messages, observe rivals, and participate in intrigues that could change provinces. Tension was deliberate, rivalries, insecurities, alliances, all monitored by eunuchs, loyal and ruthless. Fear became instinct, paranoia second nature. Relationships were political tools, friendship was a gamble. Every glance could be a plea or a threat. Obedience became survival. Even small mistakes could spiral into disaster. The empire did not merely punish, it conditioned, yet wit. In this crucible, some boys learned mastery. Survival blurred the line between agency and enslavement. Favor from the Sultan could elevate a concubine to unimaginable privileges, but with every rise came deeper scrutiny and greater peril. Physical training, grooming, and diet sculpted perfection, but perfection itself was a prison. Bodies were owned, movements monitored, thoughts constrained. As we continue, you will see obsession and manipulation intertwine, how power created beauty only to destroy it, how every act of kindness or cruelty was calculated. This is history as it was lived, breathed, endured, each concubine a silent testament to the price of power, the cost of beauty, and the cruelty hiding behind gilded walls. The palace was a living organism, every corridor, every chamber pulsed with the empire's power. For a boy within these walls, survival was the first test, rising above was the second. Some concubines learned quickly. They watched, listened, memorized. Every whisper, every glance, every subtle gesture could become a weapon. A single misstep could erase years of careful navigation, but a single correct move could elevate a boy from shadow to prominence. The Sultan's favor was the ultimate prize. It came slowly, unpredictably. One day a boy might be ignored, the next summoned to dance, play music, recite poetry, or simply smile in just the right way. Praise was intoxicating, like a warm flame in the cold halls of fear. It gave them hope. It also bound them tighter to the empire's invisible chains. Those who rose early learned the arts of charm and subtlety. They observed the Sultan's moods as carefully as a ship watches the tides. A gesture too bold, a laugh too loud, a hesitation too long, any could destroy them. Yet the rewards were real. The higher a boy climbed, the more privileges he gained. Fine garments, private chambers, access to the inner court. But every ascent demanded compliance. Obedience was not enough. The empire required perfection. Intelligence, beauty, wit, charm, all had to exist simultaneously. Rivalries were inevitable. Concubines competed silently. Every smile could mask envy. Every compliment could hide malice. Alliances were fragile, often shifting without warning. Some boys became masters of manipulation. They learned to please without revealing their ambitions. They became shadows, mirrors, actors in a courtly play of danger. Education was relentless, languages polished to perfection, music and poetry mastered to impress, conversation refined into a weapon. Every skill was measured against the Sultan's desires, but elevation brought scrutiny. The closer a boy got to the Sultan's favor, the sharper the eyes upon him became. Every gesture observed, every slip catalogued. Some concubines learned to use charm like armor. They learned subtlety as a sword. Their survival depended on their ability to predict desires, navigate politics, and mask fear with confidence. The empire encouraged this. It rewarded cunning. It punished weakness. It taught that true strength lay not in brute force, but in control of self and others. And yet, even at the height of favor, the threat of fall lingered. The concubine who shone today could vanish tomorrow. The empire was patient, relentless, and unforgiving. The palace itself seemed alive with observation. Walls had ears, servants carried secrets, eunuchs watched constantly. Fear became instinct, paranoia a companion. But within this world, some concubines found power, quiet, deadly, and mesmerizing. They learned to shape outcomes without ever raising a hand. They became players in a game few understood, moving pieces invisible to outsiders. Their ascent was a dance of shadow and light, beauty and terror intertwined. And for the few who mastered it, elevation meant more than survival. It offered influence, glimpses into the empire's machinery, and fleeting moments of control over a life designed to be controlled. Yet this rise was never free of consequence. Each privilege exacted its own price. Each favor owed a debt of subtle manipulation or hidden compliance. Even in triumph, the concubines were reminded of fragility. One misstep, one overlooked detail, one lapse in vigilance, and all power could dissolve. And while some celebrated victories in whispered confidences, others lived in constant dread. They understood that the higher they climbed, the harder they would fall. Every advancement sharpened the stakes. Every new skill honed the mind for survival. Every favor won deepened the dependency on an empire that demanded both beauty and obedience without mercy. By now, the concubines had learned to mask their fear, to manipulate perception, and to anticipate every desire before it was spoken. But the rise was not merely about survival or power. It was about becoming indispensable. The empire rewarded those who could anticipate, adapt, and endure without complaint. Some boys became so adept that they were almost untouchable, respected, feared, and admired within the hidden corridors of authority. Yet, lurking behind this facade of mastery, the palace's cruelty was never far. Every smile could conceal a trap. Every privilege could be a test. Every success could invite envy, plotting, and hidden danger. And as they rose, the concubines were subtly reshaped, not only in body and skill, but in mind. Fear and ambition intertwined until desire, compliance, and survival became inseparable. The rise was intoxicating, seductive, and too terrifying. It promised glimpses of freedom, moments of control, and fleeting authority in a world designed to deny them all three. But in the shadows of their ascent, the seeds of obsession were already being planted, both in themselves and in the eyes of those who watched them. The palace did not simply train servants, it cultivated intrigue, manipulation, and dependency. Each rise was a carefully measured trap, a gilded cage disguised as opportunity. And in that cage, the concubines would soon discover that the higher they climbed, the more they would be ensnared. Power is intoxicating, but in the palace, it was never enough. The Sultan's gaze could make a boy tremble or shine. A single look could bind a concubine's mind more tightly than any chain. Obsession began subtly. A favor here, a whispered compliment there. The concubines learned quickly. Attention was both a blessing and a cage. They studied the Sultan's moods as scholars study stars. A smile meant safety, a furrowed brow, danger. Every gesture, every tone carried meaning. Some concubines became consumed with perfection. Every movement calculated, every word rehearsed, every glance a performance. The obsession was not one-sided. The Sultan too cultivated it. He relished control over minds, over desires, over fear itself. Boys were transformed. The line between desire and terror blurred. They craved favor, feared rejection, and learned to mask every human impulse behind a serene facade. The palace whispered constantly. Stories of concubines elevated and destroyed circulated in shadowed corners. They became both warning and guide. Love, affection, and loyalty were twisted into instruments. The concubines' attachments to each other, to their masters, even to themselves, were used against them. Some became manipulators themselves, feeding the Sultan's obsession with their brilliance. Others became prisoners of their own need for approval. Even the smallest error could ignite obsession's darker edge. A missed note in music, a hesitation in speech, a falter in posture. It could spark scrutiny, suspicion, or punishment. The walls absorbed every secret. The corridors remembered every whispered plot. No corner was safe from the weight of attention. The obsession was psychological, relentless. Boys were taught that their value depended entirely on their ability to please. Failure was more than dangerous. It was invisible erasure. And yet, obsession created brilliance. Some concubines became masters of arts, poetry, music, and strategy, seducing not only the Sultan, but the court itself. In the quietest hours, they studied each other, learned weaknesses, and exploited fears. Loyalty was a performance, friendship a tool. The Sultan's obsession shaped politics, alliances, and betrayals. Concubines were pawns, yes, but some learned to play the game themselves. Every glance from the Sultan carried weight. Every casual word became an obsession. Boys became attuned to the invisible rhythms of desire and danger. Some concubines ascended through cunning. Others were destroyed by inattention or misplaced trust. Obsession spared no one. Even the eunuchs, who held authority over life and death in the harem, were not immune. Their vigilance fueled the cycle, amplifying the palace's psychological power. The concubines learned to anticipate desire before it existed, to charm, flatter, and entertain endlessly. Their identities became intertwined with the Sultan's attention. Obsession was contagious. Boys watched each other, closely imitating success, avoiding failure, and measuring every action against unseen standards. The palace itself seemed alive, feeding on ambition, manipulation, and desire. Every marble floor, every gilded wall, every perfumed corridor participated in this unspoken game. Some concubines found a strange exhilaration in obsession, a dangerous thrill that their skill could bend the empire's attention to them. Yet the higher they rose, the deeper the danger. Obsession carried the risk of exposure. One miscalculation could undo years of careful strategy. Even those who mastered the Sultan's favor lived in fear. Constant vigilance was a necessity, not a choice. Sleep, pleasure, and comfort were fleeting illusions. The concubines became architects of their own entrapment, shaping desire while being shaped by it. Every movement, every glance, every whispered word was a thread in a tapestry of control and submission. Obsession turned beauty into a weapon, fear into a tool, and attention into a prison. And as the concubines became ever more skilled, ever more desirable, the palace's invisible chains tightened. By the end, you will see how obsession, this intoxicating, merciless force, could elevate and destroy in equal measure. The stage is set, minds are primed, and the catalyst, the event that would unravel lives and reveal the empire's darkest mechanisms, is approaching. Every empire has a moment that changes everything. In the palace, it came quietly, like a shadow stretching across a sunlit hall. A single event could shift power, expose secrets, and ignite long-hidden rivalries. For the concubines, it was a test unlike any before. The catalyst often arrived without warning: a new sultan, a visit from foreign dignitaries, or even a rumor whispered in the wrong ear. One misstep could cascade into chaos. One favor withdrawn could unravel years of carefully built influence. For some, it was a betrayal from within, a rival, envious of attention, manipulated perception, a careless glance, a joke misinterpreted, and suddenly, trust dissolved. Others faced it externally. The Sultan's desires were capricious. He could favor one concubine one day and ignore him the next. Attention was unpredictable, obsession shifting like sand underfoot. And then there were those who became catalysts themselves. A bold move, a daring charm, a whispered secret. These small acts could reshape the hierarchy overnight. The palace walls seemed to pulse with anticipation. Every corridor, every chamber, every servant and eunuch held a stake in the unfolding drama. Fear, already a constant companion, became acute. Boys watched each other with new intensity. Every whisper, every hesitation, every smile was examined for hidden meaning. In this atmosphere, alliances formed quickly and dissolved even faster. Friendships were fragile, power fluid, and survival depended on reading invisible cues that could vanish in an instant. Some concubines thrived. They navigated the chaos with precision, exploiting the fears of others, predicting desires, and turning uncertainty into opportunity. Others stumbled. One poorly timed compliment, one misread gesture, one moment of inattention, and years of elevation could vanish like smoke. The catalyst revealed not just ambition, but character. It exposed those willing to manipulate, betray, or kill for survival, and those who would crumble under pressure. It sharpened the lines between predator and prey. The concubines who survived were transformed, their minds and bodies honed into instruments of power, and cunning. And yet the palace did not simply watch, it guided the chaos. The Sultan's obsession intensified. Eunuchs monitored every reaction, noting loyalties, weaknesses, and strengths. Every action became a measure of obedience and skill, every glance a test, every whisper a trap. Even the smallest details mattered. A hesitation while bowing, a mispronounced phrase, or a delay in response could trigger suspicion and punishment. The catalyst forced the concubines to redefine themselves. Survival demanded adaptability, ingenuity, and a willingness to embrace both darkness and desire. Some boys found ways to manipulate attention, bending the Sultan's gaze to their advantage. Others became invisible, surviving only through careful observation and restraint. The palace became a theatre, and the concubines, actors performing in a drama where stakes were life and death. Obsession, power, and fear intertwined. Every relationship was a strategy, every skill honed for influence, every secret a potential weapon. By the time the catalyst fully revealed itself, the concubines had been reshaped. Some had ascended to new heights, others had been broken, discarded, or silenced. But the catalyst was more than an event, it was a transformation. It was the turning point where survival alone was insufficient. Now ambition, cunning, and mastery of desire determined who would rise and who would fall. It set the stage for spectacle, manipulation, and the extremes of cruelty hidden behind gilded walls. And though the concubines may have felt prepared, nothing could truly ready them for the intensity, obsession, and danger that awaited in the next phase, the transformation that would redefine their lives entirely. The catalyst had arrived. The game was no longer about favor. It was about control, obsession, and the limits of human endurance. Every lesson learned, every skill acquired, every sacrifice made would be tested, and in that crucible, some boys would become almost untouchable. Others would vanish, their fates a cautionary whisper in the echoing corridors of power. The Empire was patient. It watched, it waited, and in the shadows of the catalyst, cruelty prepared its next move. The transformation was imminent. The catalyst had shaken the palace, but it was only the beginning. Transformation in the harem was never gentle. It crept into the bones, into the mind, into the very breath of the concubines. Some emerged sharper, more cunning. Their survival instincts evolved into artistry. They learned to bend fear, desire, and attention into weapons. Others broke, and when a boy broke, he vanished quietly, or loudly, depending on the whims of the Sultan or the eunuchs. The palace demanded adaptability. Physical training became ritualized torture disguised as preparation. Beauty was honed, posture perfected, gestures refined to a near robotic precision. But the transformation was deeper. It was in the mind. The concubines learned to anticipate obsession, predict moods, and navigate intrigue with surgical accuracy. No longer mere survivors, they became strategists. Every action, word, and glance could shape the future of their lives, or end it. The Sultan's obsession became the compass of their existence. Each boy learned to interpret subtle signals, the weight of a hand, the direction of a gaze, the cadence of a voice. Even alliances were transformed. Friends could be enemies, rivals could become tools. Every bond was measured for advantage. In these halls, beauty was both armor and liability. The more perfect a concubine appeared, the more intensely he was scrutinized. Perfection attracted favor and envy. Some boys mastered this duality. They learned to shine when required, to fade when threatened. They became invisible predators, manipulating perception while remaining untouchable. The transformation extended to psychology. Fear was no longer a reaction. It became a tool. Desire was no longer natural. It was a weapon. Every thought, emotion, and instinct was molded by necessity. The concubines' identities blurred. Who they had been outside the palace was irrelevant. The empire demanded rebirth, a self designed entirely for survival, performance, and influence. And yet, transformation carried a cost. Moments of doubt, flashes of longing for freedom or family were punished internally, gnawing at sanity like invisible rats. Some concubines turned this pain into art, music, poetry, dance. They became not just tools of favor, but expressions of control over their own suffering. Others turned cruelty inward, tormenting themselves to maintain vigilance, reminding their bodies and minds that weakness meant death. The palace was a forge, and the concubines were reshaped in its fires. Some emerged like tempered steel, beautiful, lethal, unyielding. Others crumbled into ash. The eunuchs played a critical role in this transformation. Guardians, monitors, enforcers. They observed, guided, and sometimes manipulated the concubines' evolution, ensuring loyalty and obedience at every turn. Every trial was calculated, every reward and punishment meticulously measured. The empire sought not just obedience but perfection under pressure. The transformation also sharpened ambition. Boys who had once merely survived now craved influence. They learned to wield charm, cunning, and beauty as instruments of control. And yet, for every boy who mastered the process, another was lost. Broken spirits littered the palace in invisible ways. They whispered warnings in shadows, serving as cautionary tales for the ambitious. The psychological stakes intensified. Obsession, fear, and desire intertwined into a single, suffocating force. Some concubines surrendered to it entirely, while others learned to wield it with terrifying precision. Power was no longer a gift. It was a weapon, and the concubines had to decide whether to use it, hide it, or become victims of it. The transformation was complete when the concubine could smile, speak, and perform without revealing the turbulence beneath. Every movement, every glance, every whisper became deliberate, calibrated. By now, some boys were untouchable in the eyes of the Sultan. Their mastery over perception, fear, and desire gave them a dangerous autonomy. But autonomy in the palace was a delicate illusion. Control could be granted and taken at the Sultan's whim. The higher they rose, the tighter the invisible chains. And as transformation reached its zenith, cruelty revealed its full artistry. Subtle punishments, manipulations of desire, and psychological trials became tools not just for control but for spectacle. The concubines were no longer simply surviving, they were part of a living, breathing theatre where beauty, obsession and terror combined into a relentless, elegant choreography. Some embraced this reality, becoming agents of their own survival. Others became cautionary whispers, reminders of the fragility of human ambition and beauty under absolute power. The empire had reshaped boys into something both extraordinary and horrifying, and now, as the concubines mastered their transformation, they were poised on the edge of spectacle. A moment was coming when all the skill, manipulation and resilience would be tested, not in private but for all to witness. The next phase would reveal not just the power of transformation, but the cruelty that accompanied it, a performance of obsession and terror unlike anything outside the palace walls. And the stage was set. The palace was alive with anticipation. Every hallway hummed with secrets, every chamber echoed with whispered rumors. The concubines knew what was coming. The spectacle was not a celebration, it was a test, a display, a theatre of power and obsession. Those who had mastered transformation now had to perform it openly. No misstep could be hidden behind walls or shadows. The Sultan's gaze fell like a spotlight. Every gesture, every note of music, every carefully chosen word was magnified. Some concubines dazzled. Their beauty, skill, and cunning shone like fire, drawing attention, admiration, even envy. Others faltered. The smallest tremor of fear, a faltered note, a misaligned bow, it could unravel years of careful maneuvering. The spectacle was a game with invisible rules. Success brought favor, influence, and temporary autonomy. Failure invited scrutiny, punishment, and sometimes oblivion. Every movement was observed, every glance dissected. The concubine's mastery of perception, desire, and fear was tested in front of the empire's hidden eyes. Alliances shifted in real time. Rivals became competitors on a stage where every advantage could tip the balance. Music filled the halls. Poetry danced from lips. Steps measured, smiles calculated, gestures precise. Every performance was a claim to power. But the spectacle was more than artistry. It was manipulation, a psychological web spun to entangle both audience and performer. The eunuchs orchestrated much of the drama. Guardians of protocol, enforcers of obsession, they ensured that chaos served the empire's purpose. Even the Sultan's subtle reactions could spark panic. A slight frown, a pause, a nod, it all carried meaning, feeding into the concubine's delicate calculus. The spectacle demanded perfection. Beauty, intelligence, and charm had to align seamlessly. Every flaw could be weaponized by rivals or magnified by the Sultan's obsession. Some concubines used the opportunity to manipulate. A whispered word here, a glance there. They could shift power, sow doubt, or create alliances in the blink of an eye. Others were caught in the spectacle's machinery, performing yet powerless, dancing to a tune they could barely hear. The palace itself seemed to breathe with the tension. Gold walls reflected faces, chandeliers caught every movement, and the faint scent of incense mingled with the coppery tang of fear. Even the most confident concubines learned humility in this arena. Every favor was fleeting, every triumph fragile, every recognition a fleeting illusion. But brilliance did not go unnoticed. A well-timed gesture and impeccable performance could cement influence, earning the concubine a momentary shield against envy, punishment, or disappearance. The spectacle was as much about survival as it was about dominance. In a place where obsession reigned, skill and control became weapons, performance a strategy. Rivalries ignited in whispers before flaring openly. Competitions of beauty, wit, and artistry became lethal games where a single misstep could end careers or lives. Some concubines thrived in this pressure. Fear became focus. Obsession became fuel. They turned the Sultan's gaze into armor, their mastery into a shield and sword. Others crumbled, unable to reconcile the demands of the spectacle with the vulnerabilities of the human mind. They became cautionary shadows, reminders of the stakes. The audience, unseen and omnipresent, weighed every decision. The Sultan, eunuchs, and courtly observers became instruments of invisible judgment. Yet in this crucible, moments of brilliance shone brightest. Concubines who could dance between fear and desire, charm and calculation, held power greater than many realized. But the spectacle was never just about skill. It revealed obsession in its purest form. The empire's obsession with control, beauty, and obedience, mirrored in the concubine's obsession with survival, influence, and recognition. Every performance reinforced the PA, Lace's rules. Every applause, every frown, every whispered comment shaped the invisible hierarchy. The concubines became performers and prisoners simultaneously, their very existence measured by how well they could navigate attention and expectation. And yet, the greatest cruelty was still hidden. The palace had a final reveal, a mechanism so subtle and shocking it would leave even the most seasoned observer breathless. As the spectacle reached its peak, tension crackled like lightning through the gilded halls. Some concubines shone, others trembled. Every move mattered, every glance was charged. The stage had been set for the ultimate fall, the unraveling of lives and the revelation of the empire's deepest, darkest machinery. The world outside saw opulence, music, and beauty. Inside, the concubines knew this was a battlefield where only the most cunning, adaptable, and ruthless would survive. And as the final acts of the spectacle concluded, a storm was gathering. One that would strip away facades, expose obsession, and bring the palace's cruelty into sharp, unforgettable focus. The fall was coming. The palace had risen to a crescendo of beauty, skill, and manipulation. And then, without warning, it began to collapse. The fall came quietly at first. A misinterpreted gesture, a whispered secret, a rival's carefully planted rumor. In the blink of an eye, the fragile hierarchy shifted. Those who had mastered the spectacle found themselves exposed. Fear, once a tool, became a cage. Obsession, once fuel, turned into poison. Some concubines were caught unprepared. Years of careful calculation unraveled in seconds. The Sultan's gaze, previously a blessing, now burned with suspicion. Alliances dissolved. Rivals seized the opportunity. Friends turned into observers of downfall. Every movement, every word, every glance became ammunition. The palace walls, once silent witnesses, seemed to close in. Shadows deepened. Corridors echoed with whispers of betrayal and panic. Even the masters of cunning faltered. The pressure was relentless. Every skill, every performance, every charm was tested against the unforgiving standards of power. The eunuchs enforced order with ruthless efficiency. Punishments were subtle yet devastating. Privileges stripped, movements restricted, reputations tarnished. Some concubines vanished from records entirely. No trace remained, their existence erased as if they had never survived the spectacle. Others fell in plain sight, humiliated, exposed, or publicly corrected. Every misstep served as a warning to those who remained. The psychological torment intensified. Boys who had thrived on obsession now became its victims. Fear and desire, once tools, now twisted minds into chaos. Even the most resilient concubines learned vulnerability in these hours. Confidence turned to doubt, mastery to uncertainty, influence to fragility. The fall was not only physical or social, it was internal. Pride, ambition, and identity were stripped away under the empire's relentless scrutiny. Some concubines clung desperately to favor, trying to rebuild bridges with gestures, flattery, or obedience. Others surrendered, retreating into invisibility, hoping the Sultan's attention would pass them by. But the palace allowed no respite. Every shadow could conceal a threat, every smile a trap. Survival required constant vigilance. Sharper than ever. The fall revealed the truth of the empire's cruelty. Control was absolute, and beauty, skill, or intellect offered only temporary protection. Even those who had risen highest were reminded of fragility. Elevation brought visibility, and visibility brought scrutiny, and sometimes envy, sabotage, or silent vengeance. The concubines realized that power was never theirs. It was a borrowed illusion, dependent entirely on the Sultan's obsession, the eunuch's enforcement, and the unpredictable currents of favor. Some reacted with cunning, manipulating the chaos to regain advantage. Others were broken, their brilliance extinguished by fear, betrayal, or the palace's invisible machinery. The fall was both public and private. It was spectacle and secret. Every correction, every punishment, every rumor served as a reminder. The empire demanded obedience above all else. Pain and humiliation became lessons etched into body and mind. Every survivor carried scars, some visible, others hidden in the silent corridors of memory. Yet the fall also revealed opportunity. For those skilled in perception, manipulation, and endurance, it became a chance to ascend once more. The palace was merciless, but it rewarded adaptation. Those who could read obsession, navigate fear, and wield desire gained advantage even amid collapse. But collapse left nothing untouched. Pride, trust, and certainty dissolved like mist. Every success was tenuous, every favor fleeting. The concubines learned that the empire's cruelty was not in violence alone. It was in subtlety, patience, and psychological mastery, slowly dismantling even the strongest minds. The fall prepared them for what came next. The aftermath, where survival alone would not suffice, and where the full consequences of obsession and power would become undeniable. And in that silence, as the palace exhaled after the storm, the concubines understood a haunting truth. The higher they had risen, the further they could fall. The palace had grown quiet, but the echoes of the fall lingered.